Ohio remains scarlet with very little gray. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. After months of dissecting polls, analyzing every micro-demographic group's attitude, gauging the outrage of every insult and false claim, the 2024 election came down to one thing. 72% of Americans are either dissatisfied or angry with the status quo. And as always happens, the party in power suffers the consequences. Given that fundamental fact, only Donald Trump's personal unpopularity kept Republicans from winning a national landslide. In Ohio, Trump's victory was even more convincing than his last two. He defeated Kamala Harris 55% to 44%. That is 2 points better than his margins in 2016 and 2020. Lord Bischoff, I guess it's somewhat of a surprise that he lengthened his margin of victory, but it's no surprise that he won, and he won easily, Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that the economic message about high inflation really resonated with voters. And like you said, there's sort of a yearning for change, and they didn't see Kamala Harris, who is the VP, as the change agent. I think that also it demonstrates that Ohio is trending more and more red. The Democrats haven't won a governor's race since 2006. They're 0 for 6 in Ohio Supreme Court races since the party labels got added. And so this is just par for the course.
Terry Casey, Donald Trump got 37,000 fewer votes this year than he did in 2020 in Ohio. But the Democrats got 200,000 fewer votes. Kamala Harris, 200,000 fewer votes. So his level of support in Ohio basically stayed flat. The margin was better, though.
Well, but you pointed out the problem for the Democrats, and when you look at the 6 major urban largest counties in Ohio, their turnout was only at 66%, including Lucas at only 61.5%. But when you looked at the more Republican, rural, mid-sized counties, they were in the 70 to 77%. So turnout was a big factor. There was a lot more enthusiasm for the economic reasons you cited on the Republican side. The Democrats just weren't that motivated and excited about Harris.
Why was that, Dale?
Why weren't they excited about Harris? I think you said it in your opening. Fairly or unfairly, 70% of the electorate said that they think the economy is lousy. 75% say that America is on the wrong track. Those are daunting headwinds for anybody who's part of the incumbent administration. And frankly, I think in some ways it's remarkable she came as close as she did under those circumstances.
Is this, I mean, she only had 3 months to run a campaign, but she was Biden's vice president. Would it have been different if there was a different Democrat at the top of the ticket? Or if she had had a full year to campaign even?
Yeah, it could have been different, but it's, we can't run the experiment again, see how that would have turned out. There's a lot of conversation now about whether Biden should have stuck to his promise to be a 4-year president. The thing about primaries is primaries are a good pulse of where the people are. And we missed out on that primary process. I don't think Democrats really knew exactly where the pulse of the people were. There was conversation in July about a mini primary, about a brokered convention. They all decided that was too much chaos, but I think an actual primary process would have shown perhaps better where their base was.
J.D. Vance now becomes vice president, Laura. So now we have to fill a Senate seat. Mike DeWine has to fill a Senate seat. What kind of senator do you think Mike DeWine is looking to get?
I think he's going to pick somebody who can win re-election and who can play nice with the Trump administration. And the other factor might be, does he want to take out contenders in the governor's race to help clear the table for his lieutenant governor, John Husted, who wants to be governor?
A lot of things at play here, Terry.
Well, one of the interesting things, I spent about 20 minutes last week with the governor one-on-one in his office, and we talked about, and I said, come Wednesday, you might be very popular next week. And the irony is, On Wednesday, he got virtually nothing else done, people calling, but surprisingly, there was a whole bunch of different county commissioners and mayors who were calling up saying, I'd be a wonderful person. I could finish out my career. It'd be nice to have a senator. But he's going to take his time, hold his cards close. But uniquely, he might be one of the only governors ever to have been a senator for 12 years, know what being a senator is about, and he wants someone that can both win in 26 because they got to run again in 28, and then he wants somebody also that has the skill to deliver and help Ohio out in the Senate, and he knows the skills that are needed.
And the names are Dave Yost, Attorney General, says he doesn't want it. John Husted, Frank LaRose, Secretary of State, Vivek Ramaswamy. Who else? Who's not on the list is the question, I guess.
Yeah, well, beforehand, we were talking about the possibility of Jane Timken. She ran in the primary in 2020. She did not win, but that would be our first female senator ever from Ohio. She has a good relationship with DeWine. It got a little rocky there for a while, but I think she's patched up her relationship with Donald Trump. Could be a legacy thing, appointing the first female senator. Vivek Ramaswamy also may want a cabinet position. He also may be eyeing governor. We're not really sure, although he did just relocate his businesses to Texas. Maybe he's leaving the state entirely. So there's a lot of conversation around who he's going to pick, especially because 2026 will be a midterm. And if past is prologue, the party in power gets hit in the midterm. So they got to pick somebody that can win not only then, but in 28.
So, Dale, I'm guessing Democrats hope that the most extreme Republican gets selected so that they can have a chance maybe in 26.
Well, sure, except extremism doesn't seem to be much of a bar now for Republicans to cross in this state. I was reminded of the fact, Laura did a great piece today on how far things have swung in Ohio. I'm reminded of the fact that the last time Ohio voted for a senator and a president from two different parties on the same ballot was 36 years ago in 1988. Ohio, when Mike DeWine finishes his term in January of next year, Ohio will have had a Republican governor for 32 out of the last 36 years. Swing state, it's more like Mississippi North.
Yeah, let's get to that. All things considered, Sherrod Brown did what he had to do. He convinced about 7% of Trump voters to vote for him. It was not enough. While Donald Trump won by 10 points, Bernie Moreno won by less than 4, but that was plenty to defeat the three-term Democratic incumbent.
Look, today starts a new wave. We talked about wanting a red wave. I think what we have tonight is a red, white, and blue wave in this country. Because what we need in the United States of America is leaders in Washington, D.C. that actually put the interests of American citizens above all else. We're tired of being treated like second-class citizens in our own country.
We may be tempted to say hope was not enough. We might be tempted to second-guess ourselves and question whether we worked hard enough or long enough. That is not our story tonight. We believe that all work has dignity. We always will. We believe in the power of people over corporate special interests. We always will. We believe if you love this country, you fight for the people who make it work. We always will. This is a disappointment, but is not a failure.
Dale Butlin, with Donald Trump on the ballot, was there any chance that Sherrod Brown was going to win this race? It was just the headwinds were so strong.
Yeah, I mean, viewers who may have seen me on other television shows know that I've been saying for literally months that Sherrod's chances of being re-elected were almost entirely dependent on the size of Trump's margin here in the state. Everybody knew Trump was going to win Ohio. I thought that, Trump had won Ohio by 8 points, both in 16 and 20. I thought if we could keep that margin to 5, 6, 7 points, Sherrod could win. And in fact, he could have. Yeah. Unfortunately, Trump expanded his margin here to 11 points, and that became a headwind that was just too strong.
Again, it was Democrats, Anna, who didn't show.
Yeah, 200,000 of them. That would have changed the margin on this, especially when you look at turnout in places like Cleveland. It was even well below 60%. So I mean, that could be. They just didn't think the state was going to matter, and Brown was not enough of a draw to come out. Whereas, like, I mean, maybe not campaigning with Harris didn't bring him out. We'll never know. But it is interesting, and I think the Democratic Party needs to really look at, okay, so why didn't these people turn out, especially when so many people considered it an important election?
Terry, what was the issue that won it for Bernie Moreno? Was there one issue? There were a lot of issues in this campaign that came up. The border, transgender rights, abortion.
Well, it was partly the Trump thing, as Dale has mentioned, but I think one of the key things, the Democrats put all their hopes on two things. One, they tried to remake Brown into some kind of version of Trump light, which didn't work for Tim Ryan 2 years ago, didn't work again this year. And the other thing, they put all their hopes on abortion as the big thing, but the reality is in Ohio, twice last year, people voted on abortion, and that was already done and decided, so it didn't have as much power as they hoped and thought.
Laura, why do you think that that didn't carry over? Because in the past, you know, referendum elections, I'm thinking of the SB 5, the collective bargaining thing carried over and helped Obama in 2012. The abortion vote, as far as we know, didn't really help Sherrod Brown. At least didn't lead to a victory.
Well, I mean, Sherrod lost by 3.7 points,
Yeah.
and Trump won by 11.5 points. So maybe it did help him. I think that Trump's expansion of his margin of victory in Ohio that proved that he had very long coattails, and it harmed Sherrod Brown and it helped Bernie Moreno.
Dale, Tim Ryan, when he ran in 22, complained, and his supporters complained, that he didn't get the national support. That was not the case this year. There was lots of national support for both candidates, and Sherrod Brown, you know, there was a huge factor in this race, but it didn't
Yeah, I mean,
matter.
Sherrod obviously had plenty of money. You know, what was it, Terry? $400 million?
No, it's close to $500 million,
Okay, so
half
$500
billion.
million. Just to show you how this has expanded, in 1988, when I was on loan from John Glenn to Howard Metzenbaum, his reelection campaign ran against George Voinovich. Both campaigns spent over $7 million, which at the time was far and away the most ever spent on a campaign in Ohio. Now we're at $400 million. Money was not a problem, and with due respect to Tim Ryan, who I thought ran a really good campaign, money wasn't the issue for him either. The fact is, Ohio is now a beat red state.
What kind of senator, Terry, will Bernie Moreno be? Will he be a populist, or will he be a Chamber of Commerce Republican?
I think he'll be a little bit of both, and in the day after his election, he made the point that he wanted to reach out to mayors in Cuyahoga County, Franklin County, other places, find out what the federal government could do differently. And also remember, he was derided as only a car dealer, but from his experience in dealing with customers, he understands you better listen and you better pay attention to what people need. And there's a lot of needs in Ohio. There's a lot of mayors, other people that want to get the federal government more focused, more efficient. They'd like more money, but if the federal government loosens up on some of the requirements, that would make a lot of governmental people happy.
Rust proofing. Got to have the rust proofing.
And the free car washes.
What are Frank LaRose, Josh Mandel, other Republicans who have run statewide and lost and won statewide, and our two senators came out of nowhere. Two Republican senators came out of the business world, had never run before.
I think it's a reflection of where our politics are now. Incumbency doesn't seem to help, right? Trump sort of rewrote that narrative. He'd never held public office before he assumed the White House. And Vance and Moreno have sort of modeled themselves after that, the idea that institutionalism is the problem. And I think that has that appeal. We need business people to come from the outside and fix it. And whether you agree with that or you don't agree with that, it clearly seems to be a path to victory.
And that seems more like an appeal at the federal level than it does at the state level.
Yeah.
So a business person from outside doesn't have as good a chance to run for governor or win the governor's race.
Yeah, although, who knows, maybe Vivek will have a different take on that.
But with governors, they want somebody that can make the roads get cleared in the wintertime, the prisons running efficiently, the operations. So governor versus federal, there are differences.
Well, those of us in Columbus need to talk to the governor then, because in the wintertime, our roads are never clean anyway. Supporters of Issue 1, the redistricting reform amendment, raised and spent nearly $40 million in the campaign. Opinion polls showed Ohioans overwhelmingly supported their general goal of removing partisanship from legislative district map making. But on Election Day, the voters said no by an 8-point margin. Supporters say they were done in by biased ballot language designed to confuse voters.
Everybody that voted in this election, I venture to say, thought they were voting to end gerrymandering. It was just the manipulation that's what defeated it. The manipulation by the folks that are making those kind of decisions.
Anna Staver, the race was not that close. How much of a factor was the ballot language versus just being caught in this red wave?
I think it could have been a little bit of both. I always thought that the confusing ballot language was going to turn off a couple percentage points just because when people don't understand, they vote no. But I also think that we shouldn't underestimate the ability of the Ohio voter to know what they're voting for. You know, when abortion rights passed, we heard a lot of conservatives say, oh, people didn't understand the ballot language. And you want to be like, people kind of know what they're voting for and they can make their choices. But there was really effective messaging because what you have to think about is every Republican running for office in Ohio was messaging on issue 1. So sure, they didn't have a lot of flashy ads, but you went to like every time they were going to a rubber chicken dinner or to a small group of people, they were talking about issue 1 pretty solidly and saying, hey, if you're a conservative, you're going to be against this. And I think that was the message, though not on television, that prevailed.
Yeah,
Trump also appeared in ads.
Yeah.
Let me say a couple of things. First, I don't think there's any question, Ann, that they tried to confuse the issue because even the yard signs in my neighborhood, the vote no one said end gerrymandering, vote no, when in fact the exact opposite was true. So everybody understood that Ohioans dislike gerrymandering. That's where Donald Trump came in. I think a much greater factor was the no side's decision to make this a referendum on Donald Trump by running television ads saying Donald Trump wants you to vote no. As much as Ohioans dislike gerrymandering, they like Donald Trump even more.
And the Plain Dealer editor today, who's very liberal, very supportive of issue 1, he basically summarized things were too complicated and therefore their messaging had to be much better. And when you have dark ads and negative messages, that connotes negative vote no. So if you're going to sell a yes vote, you got to have a positive uplift to it.
Dale, would it have been better? Hindsight's always 20/20 on elections, we think anyway. Would it have been better for these folks to go in an off-year election? Abortion was last year, an odd number year election, or even a midterm election when turnout is lower and the folks who vote tend to be higher information voters. There would be, the confusion factor was less of a factor last year, I think, than this year when you have a huge number of voters.
Yes, no, I think that's right. And I do think that in retrospect, probably would have been better to have this in an off year. Not only would you not have had Trump on the same ballot, with it, but as you say, you'd have had higher information voters. There's a lot of voters, remember, who just turn out in presidential years. And it's much easier to confuse those folks than it is people who are really active in politics.
What about the overall campaign strategy of the yes side? Bipartisan, they had Republicans and Democrats, they had people from veterans, they had Maureen O'Connor herself appearing.
But when you say we've got to stop these politicians and then you have somebody who's been lieutenant governor and now in the Supreme Court, yes, she was a judge at one point, but she also is a political person. So having a political person telling you to stop politics gets a little confusing. Again, I think the messaging on the yes side, for $38 million, they could have done a much better job selling because the other side, I think, only had $8 million. Normally, with that much money, you should have done a better job.
Now, Governor DeWine and Keith Faber, the auditor, both members of the Redistricting Commission, said that the current system does not work and they were willing to work on another plan. The Iowa plan is the gold standard, according to the governor. Laura, is that work begun?
There was some mention of that on Thursday during a press gaggle that the governor had. I don't know how forceful or how quickly they're going to dive into it. Well, remains to be seen.
And it would have been wise for, now Maureen O'Connor was upset and rightfully a little bit bitter on election night. She said, no, we're done. But wouldn't it be wise for these supporters to get with Governor DeWine in his last 2 years and say, let's go with the Iowa plan. It's better than what we have now. It may not be what we wanted in this election. Any chance of that happening? The League, Common Cause?
Maybe. I mean, it was with any election, you need time to process, to go home, to lick your wounds. So come January, they may feel differently. I don't know. And also, the League of Women Voters is separate from Maureen O'Connor, has separate structure. They could make their own choices. If it actually gets legs, I think that's the bigger question. So on election night, I was texting with Senate President Matt Huffman, and he gave a very non-committal answer that was sort of like, if people want to have this conversation, they can have this conversation. And if he's the Speaker of the House and he doesn't want to change it, it goes nowhere.
What if just the legislature tries to come up with a different redistricting plan?
Well, they could come up with something different. The problem is Ohio is such a diverse state where people are polarized in terms of where they live. It's hard to really make 99 perfect House districts that are all balanced because our geography, our demographics are so diverse. And then also a lot of people in a lot of parts of the state like to keep communities together, like to keep counties whole. How do you balance out all those factors? How do you figure out the priorities?
All right. Our last topic, as we learned on Wednesday morning, life goes on. There's still traffic on 315, lines at the coffee shop, drive-thrus. Gas is a little cheaper. Hopefully we exchanged a friendly wave with a neighbor with opposing candidates' lawn signs on Wednesday, but the political division runs deep, and despite candidates' calls for unity, no doubt the bitterness will continue. Terry Casey, my question is, does the bitterness and divisiveness get worse?
It could. We'll see what happens. I mean, in some ways this week there was encouraging signs of another cut in the interest rates. I think the pick for the White House Chief of Staff is a good one and a historic one. And I talked to Congressman Mike Carey yesterday, and he made the point Donald Trump no longer will be running for office. And sometimes people, when they don't have an election ahead of them, they sometimes do things a little differently. But all of it depends on where's the economy head, where's the world head. But we can hopefully be optimistic that things will get better.
Jay, what do Democrats do? I mean, the working class, not just white working class now, these polls showed that working class of any race is going towards Trump.
It's a problem we have to fix. You know, we used to be the voice of the economically downtrodden. Now we've been turned into what many people look at as the sort of the party of the elite, the cultural elite, and the college educated. We've got to figure out a way to do something differently. It's not just a matter of, you know, some people say, well, Democrats always look down, they condescend to working people. Yeah, that's a part of it. That certainly doesn't help, but that's only part of it. The truth of the matter is, this is the third election in a row where the incumbent party has been thrown out of office. And the reason is nobody has figured out how to spread the wealth and the gains from globalization to a broad swath of people. It's all concentrated at the very top. And I personally do not think that anything Trump has proposed to do is going to fix that problem. Tariffs, if he follows through on that, which won't be paid. This is important, Mike. I hope our viewers understand this. Tariffs are not paid by the country against whom they're levied. They're paid by consumers who buy the stuff. So that's just going to reignite inflation.
Well, with gerrymandered districts, Anna, because you've studied this a lot, is there any chance that there can be, there's no compromise here, because the Republican compromises in this state, they get primaried. So the chances of compromise without the redistricting changes are pretty slim.
Even with the redistricting changes, it's a reflection, like one of the things we learned during the redistricting series was we're self-sorting a lot more, right? We don't live in politically diverse neighborhoods. Birds of a feather increasingly flock together. This makes it also harder to draw competitive districts when we're all self-sorting, all on our own. And so I think, you know, they call it on social media the echo chamber. And I think one of the issues in bridging this divide is we're not living, working, hanging out with people who think differently.
I was going to say one divisive issue that we will not be hearing about is rigged elections. I think that the Trump team is going to pipe down on that line. We've already, that's gone silent.
So we did have a fair election, apparently, this time.
Yes.
That's what. Anyway, real quickly, Dale, should Democrats play tougher? Should they take a page out of the Trump playbook and be a little bit more, they called him a tyrant and stuff, but be even more aggressive?
Well, in terms of what's going to happen going forward, Democrats are not going to be able to do much of anything in Washington. I mean, Trump controls not just the White House, but he's got both houses of Congress too. I think a lot of this, whether we can heal this divide, is going to depend really more on Trump and his allies.
All right, let's get to our off-the-record final parting shots. Terry Casey, you're up first.
Speaking about coming together, early next year, the state's got to come up with a budget for the next 2 years. It's going to be tough because a lot of the programs they've decided on, the money's going to be short. So we're going to test people being able to work things out. But with less money, it's a lot tougher. There's going to be hard decisions, and it's going to be tough in the next budget cycle.
Dale.
As of tonight, there are 3 U.S. Senate races that have yet to be called: Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania. The importance of who wins those cannot be overstated. If the Republicans have a 2-seat majority, or maybe even 3-seat majority, centrists like Lisa Murkowski can play a role. Susan Collins, they can play a role. They can moderate some of the more extremist legislation. If there's a 4 or 5-seat majority, they don't matter.
Anna.
I'm going to take a decidedly non-political twist. The city of Dublin is considering a plan to put together a Christmas market, and I think that would be wonderful. So I am going to be biased and say you guys should do that.
All right. Laura?
Good news for readers. 26 of 28 library levies passed on Tuesday, and that kind of continues the historic trend of Ohioans loving the libraries.
Everybody loves the library. How can you vote against the library?
More books to burn.
Well, there we go. My off-the-record comment is I think that congratulations to former Columbus on the Record panelist Desiree Timms, who won a state rep seat, and also Derek Clave. He won the job of CEO of the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. So congratulations to both of them. That's Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the conversation online, Facebook, and watch us anytime at our website, wosu.org. Also on the PBS app and YouTube. For our crew and panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.